Share this article. Tweet Scott Russo October 13, 2017. Photos by Nick Stover and Scott Russo. The clop, clop, clop of my steel shoe resonating through my helmet as I walked through the uncomfortable October heat at Paris Auto Speedway in my trusty NJK leathers as I headed toward the snarling motorcycle that was waiting for me. Not just any motorcycle, mind you, but maybe the most amazing motorcycle I've ever been privileged to ride in my 25 years as a motoscribe. Dirtbikes.com editor-in-chief and Mo contributor Scott Russo rolls the Indian Scout ftr750 through a corner at the Paris half-mile. Russo was one of a select few journalists to ride the bike, which won the American Flat Track Twins Championship with Jared Meese aboard in its debut season. Photo by Nick Stover. And all I could think before I swung a leg over this gorgeous deep red, black, and white Indian Scout ftr750 flat tracker, something that only a handful of professional flat trackers, let alone aging motorcycle journalists, has ever done, was to blurt out a little sarcastic humor to my friend Brian Bergen. "Stand back," I told Bergie. "I'm gonna throw this thing through the fence." It was nervous sarcasm to be sure, as the last thing I wanted to do was scratch anything besides the tires on what I believe is one of the coolest purpose-built, factory racing motorcycles ever. My mind was quickly rehashing the paperwork I'd signed in order to ride the damn thing in the first place. I couldn't recall seeing a clause on the order of, "If you crash the hell out of this thing, you owe us 50 grand, but it was probably in the fine print, and my eyes are too shut to read that tiny drivel anymore. Besides, I would have signed my life away for the opportunity to ride an Indian model that has already made history. I mean, in 2017, Indian did something that no other manufacturer has ever done in the 64-year history of the American Flat Track Series, formerly known as the AMA Grand National Championship Series, when it not only won the Premier F Twins Championship but also claimed the top 3 spots in the title race with an all-new, ground-up motorcycle design in its debut season. Going from drawing board to racetrack in just 9 months, the Scout ftr750 may be the most compelling proof of parent company Polarized's intention to bring the Indian brand back to its former glory days, when it outran Harley-Davidson on the track and in dealer showrooms. Photo by Scott Russo. Now, if you're a regular Mo reader, you're probably well aware of Indian's amazing Scout ftr750, a race-only version of the Scout. Forget that. The two share practically nothing in common other than the fact that they both have V-twin engines and round wheels. The Scout ftr750 went from drawing board to race-ready machine in just over 9 months. Indian certainly stacked the 2017 title odds in its favor when it hired the 3 riders who have held the Flat Track Championship, among them since 2012, including 4-time champion Jared Meese, 2013 champion Brad Baker and 2016 champion Brian Smith. What followed was as dominant a performance by a Harley-Davidson interloper as the series has ever seen. And it isn't like the Scout ftr750 was the product of some years-long development cycle. What began as an idea by Indian Motorcycle VP Gary Gray and Indian Motorcycle President Steve Minetto to get the Indian brand back to its roots and ultimately shock the flat track world was little more than a pipe dream just 3 short years ago. "We had to get our core business in shape before we could even think about this," Gray told me at Paris. "Since we started on the first production street bikes, we had talked about going back to flat track. We launched 11 models in 3 years, developed our dealer network and had a pretty good base, so we started talking about what we could do to give back to the sport. I talked to Steve Minetto, president of Indian Motorcycle, and said, here's an idea of something that we could do in the next 2 to 3 years. Then in September of 2015, Steve made the announcement that Indian would be back in flat track in 2017 or 2018. That was way faster than I was thinking, but we started designing the bike in December of 2015, and were on the track testing by June of 2016. Indian Motorcycle Vice President Gary Gray is living the dream. Along with Indian Motorcycle President Steve Minetto, Gray pushed for Indian's return to flat track racing, setting realistic goals in the first season. Safe to say that those goals were not only met but far exceeded. Photo by Scott Russo. Engine design and construction was handled by Swissito, a Polaris-owned company that already had a track record designing motive engines. Chassis development was coordinated with aftermarket V-twin parts supplier SS. A few bits and pieces were sourced from companies with long-standing reputations for producing quality flat-track parts. In light of how well the bike performed when it made its debut at the Santa Rosa Mile in California with former AMA Grand National Champion Joe Kopp. It seems like such a short amount of time, but then again maybe not. The bike Kopp rode was the product of extensive testing during much of the 2016 American flat track season. What we did was we would rent the track after every round so that we could test on good tracks, and we finally got it to where we felt we could make a main event by the last race of the season. Gray said, "You can test all you want by yourself, but it's not a real test until you're in a race. So we got Joe to ride the bike at Santa Rosa, and he qualified in our first heat, won the Dash for Cash and ran really well in the main. That was a really good test." With the announcement that Indian had hired Smith, Meese and Baker, everything seemed to fall into place, but the tremendous risk in that move is not lost on Gray. In racing, nothing is a given, and it was entirely possible that unforeseen failures could have made Indian look silly. Dream teams rarely experience the dream. Gray was well aware of that as he wrote down his expectations prior to the start of the 2017 season. If the Scout ftr750 could score 3 podium finishes, and if one of the Indian factory riders could manage a 5th place finish in the season points standings, Indian would call it a successful year on which to build for the future. But when Meese came out at the very first race of the year, a TT track at Daytona that no one had ever ridden before, and he led every lap of the race en route to the first national flat track win by an Indian since the mid-1950s, the handwriting was on the wall. What followed was a 2017 season in which Meese, Smith and Baker mostly battled each other for race wins and podiums at every round of the series. When the dust settled on the 2017 season, Indian was not only back on top of the flat track world, it broke records along the way. The 2017 AF Twins Championship winning Scout FTR 750 tuned by legendary flat track tuner Kenny Tolbert carried Meese to 17 podium finishes, surpassing the record shared by former series champions Scott Parker and Ricky Graham. Meese also landed 10 wins to tie all-time winner Parker for second on the single-season winners list, 2 wins behind Graham. Smith added another 4 wins to give Indian 14 wins in 18 rounds. The man in American flat track racing right now, Jared Meese piloted his factory Indian Scout FTR 750 to 10 wins and a record-breaking 17 podium finishes in the team's debut season. So why isn't he smiling? He's probably bent that he didn't break the single-season win record of 12 wins set by Ricky Graham. That's just how competitive Meese is. Photo by Scott Russo. Meese or Smith won the first 8 races of season, and Baker joined them for 6 podium sweeps by Indian. As one final kick to the shins of its predominantly Harley-Davidson, Kawasaki and Yamaha competition, Johnny Lewis put the first of the 50 Privateer Scout FTR 750 slated to be built and sold to the public on the podium during the penultimate round of the series at Texas Motor Speedway, proving that there is no appreciable performance difference between what Indian sells and what its factory team races. How's that for a debut season? Talking to Tolbert about the Scout FTR 750 was like old home week. During my years covering the series full-time, from 1995 through 2006, I could always count on him to tell me the truth, good or bad. When talking about the Scout FTR 750, a project that he became involved with from the drawing stage, the news is almost entirely good from his perspective. As soon as I heard about it, I knew I wanted to be a part of it. Tolbert said, "We started looking at the drawings, and I told them, we gotta have this, and we gotta have that, and this is where the engine needs to be in the chassis." We took the dimensions right off the Harley and went from there. Swissito built such a great compact engine. We spent a lot of time messing with crank inertia, flywheel mass and sizes. It's a great bike. It's everything you'd want in a dirt track racing engine. I wanted to experience the Indian's magic, but I was also a little more than scared at the same time. As a former Pro-Am flat track racer, I have a reasonable amount of experience turning left on dirt ovals, but it had been over 15 years since I last slid into a curve on the super sticky clay of the half-mile Paris Auto Speedway track. And I didn't want to look like a dumbass. I was 4th in line to ride the machine, a smart move I thought, unless one of the journalists ahead of me managed to toss the thing, which would probably have ended our day. Soon enough, it was my turn. No time to think about it or talk myself out of it. Before I knew it, I was letting out the clutch and pulling onto the track. While Russo only got 5 laps aboard the Scout FTR 750, they spoke volumes about just how advanced the Indian is compared to its competition. Its engine is rocket ship fist yet smooth as silk, and its chassis is amazingly well sorted. Indian selected the best flat track riders in the world to race the bike, but you don't have to be one of them to appreciate just how cool the bike is. Photo by Nick Stover. Each of us would only get 5 laps plus the cool-off to gain a perspective on the Scout ftr750. 5 laps. Just a taste. Drug dealer tactics. The first high is free and then you start paying. That said, in those 5 laps I remembered quite a lot, and it was amazing to me how my stint brought me right back to the last 750cc flat tracker I'd ridden on a half-mile, 12 years ago, when I was granted the opportunity to ride series champion Chris Carr's Tolbert-tuned Harley-Davidson XR750. Boy, was Carr ever right when he proclaimed after testing the Scout FTR750 for us at Santa Rosa last year that this was the kind of bike Harley-Davidson should have built 15 years ago. Related Indian Scout FTR750 ride review for starters. Despite its aggressive, athletic exhaust note, the Scout FTR750 is sewing machine smooth. I never felt a hint of vibration through the handlebars or its thinly padded carbon fiber seat. I couldn't say the same about Carr's XR all those years ago, and Tolbert confirmed in my mind what my hands, feet and butt had already told me. It has counterbalancers, the way they did it, and it's so electric, he said. It doesn't shake at all. Immediately trying to get a feel for the Scout FTR750's power delivery, I went ahead and whacked the throttle as much as I dared, and its fuel-injected V-twin responded with the most linear yet forceful pull I've ever experienced on flat track machine. Harleys I've ridden have a lot more flywheel effect, so they tend to be a little slower to regain lost revs, but at the same time that stored energy will grab traction and suck you into a corner if you back off the gas, which can be a harrowing sensation if you're not ready for it. The fast Harley guys very quickly learn to manage that power delivery and keep the XR's track-durable engine singing in a happy place that allows them to convert that flywheel mass into drive. Here again, Tolbert backed up that feeling after the fact. So why is this man smiling? Kenny Tolbert was already a legendary tuner with 9 AMA flat track titles under his belt before he signed on to help Indian with the Scout FTR750 project. Now Tolbert has 10 titles in the bank, and he is confident that he and Mies can partner up to win some more. Photo by Scott Russo. You can feed it the gas, and it just picks up its feet and goes. Tolbert said, with the Harleys, even when you pick up the gas, they don't really go. On top of that, the pushrod, 12-valve XRs have always paid a penalty for their perfect power delivery by running out of RPM up top. In an effort to stay competitive, XR750R teams have stretched that upper RPM limit far beyond what the factory ever intended, drastically shortening engine life, which has only added to maintenance costs in the latter years of the XR's amazing run at the top of the sport. Where the Indian Scout FTR750 trumps the Harley is in its ability to spin at higher RPM while also being super tractable. In fact, the bike I rode at Paris, which Indian officials told me wasn't detuned in any way, had one of the most linear feeling racing engines I've ever experienced. When you gas it, it hauls ass. But when you let off, it doesn't keep trucking into the corner, which made it extremely easy to ride and not at all as intimidating as I thought it would be. The chassis is equally impressive. American flat track rules mandate a minimum weight of 310 pounds for twins, but the Scout FTR doesn't feel that heavy at all. Indian obviously got the chassis right. Really right. It steers with surprising precision without feeling top-heavy or otherwise cumbersome. Journalists weren't the only ones to sample the Scout FTR750 at Paris Auto Speedway. Motorcycle industry icon Tom White strapped on his skid shoe and hopped aboard his own personal Scout FTR750 to make a few laps. White was the first customer to take delivery of one of the 50 copies being sold to the public. Photo by Nick Stover. Unfortunately, the combination of a sticky racetrack and my own ring rest didn't allow me to really put the bike into a race-based slide to see just how far the chassis can be pushed. On the precious few occasions that I did feel it start to back into turn 1, the bike didn't impart a sketchy feel at all, and it would easily fall right back into line as I applied a heavy dose of throttle through the apex and off the corner. This last part was the fun part, as the Scout FTR750 builds rev so quickly and willingly that it felt like a rocket down the straightaways. I'd placed the pucker factor squarely in the 10 column. Related 10 Best Motorcycles at Tom White's Early Years of Motocross Museum. Are there any weak points in the design? Well, there were, but as Tolbert points out, Indian was really responsive to input by him and Meese during the testing phase. Coming into the season, both men were confident that they had what they needed to win. There were some weak spots, but I don't want to tell you what they were, and we did overcome them. Tolbert said, I mean, it's no secret that the thing spit Jared off and broke his shoulder when we first got started. After that, those first 5 engines became dyno engines only. We were given strict orders not to ride them, and Indian went right back to the drawing boards and fixed the problems. The next thing you know, here we are and it's all good. I had already traveled at a pace that was better than I'd expected, and I was looking forward to more when the checkered flag flew, ending my all-too-brief introduction to what, in my mind, is perhaps Indian's greatest success since Polaris revived the brand. The Scout ftr750 is an amazing motorcycle, and while it would be a disservice to downplay the tremendous effort put in by the Indian wrecking crew and its talented band of mechanics and crew who helped make the machine a champion in its debut season, they clearly had a great motorcycle to start with. Russo waves to the camera while backing it down after 5 of the coolest laps he's ever spun on any track in the world. Afterward, he muttered something about checking to see if Indian has a Scout ftr750 in its lone pool. All that remains to be seen now is how Harley-Davidson will respond. It's no secret that the Vance Innes-led factory effort has clearly struggled while continuing to develop the still new XG750R into a consistently competitive machine. It's to Harley's credit that it went all in on the project, abandoning the venerable XR750R, which is a known quantity. It makes me wonder just how much more fun this sport will be to watch if and when Harley-Davidson is able to challenge Indian week in and week out with the XG750R. Throw in Yamaha's increasingly competitive FZ07-based racers and the already competitive Kawasaki-powered machines out there, and the series can only get more interesting. The Indian Scout ftr750 is the best motorcycle in its class right now, and with Indian's announcement of a massive contingency program for Scout ftr750 mounted privateers in the American Flat Track Series, it's clearly here to stay.